at Ellis Mayhew's funeral. His widow caught my sleeve beside the hymnals and said, "Warren, he let you hate him because your son was not strong enough to survive the truth." I had not spoken to Ellis in 18 years. Not since the night my daughter left Tulsa in his pickup. My auction house was short $12,000, and my wife, Jean, looked me in the eye and said, "If you follow them, don't come home." I was 66 by the time Ellis died, retired from auctioneering, divorced, and living in a little ranch house where every room sounded larger than it was. I still had my voice then, though not the same one I used to sell farm tools and estate jewelry. That old voice could make strangers believe a chipped vase had history. It could also make my children flinch. Ellis and I had been friends since we were boys. He knew my first dog, my father's bad temper, the exact way I took coffee, and the silence I used when I was too proud to apologize. Then he became the man I blamed for breaking my family. His funeral was held in a Methodist church outside Broken Arrow. I went because old hatred gets embarrassing after a man dies. I planned to stand in the back, nod to Ruth, and leave before anyone offered potato salad. Ruth stopped me near the door. She looked smaller than I remembered. Ellis's widow had always been sturdy, the kind of woman who could carry grief and groceries in the same arm. That day her hand trembled on my sleeve. "What did you say?" I asked. She glanced toward the casket. "Ellis made me promise not to tell while he was alive. I kept that promise. I'm tired now." "Tell me what?" Ruth's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "Your daughter didn't steal that money." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because some truths arrive so late they sound rude. Then Ruth said, "And neither did Ellis." The auction house was called Pruitt and Mayhew, though Ellis never liked having his name painted on the window. "You talk," he used to say. "I'll keep the numbers honest." That was how we worked. I stood under the lights with a microphone, charming bidders into raising paddles. Ellis handled consignments, bills of sale, checkbooks, taxes, all the quiet duties that decide whether a business is real or just a man making noise. Jean ran the front counter on Saturdays. Our daughter Molly clerked after school. Our son Nate helped move furniture and complained about it like any 17-year-old boy with healthy arms and better plans. That last winter, before everything broke, we had been busy with the Abernathy estate, old ranch family, good silver, 2 tractors, a gun safe we sold to a man who wore cologne strong enough to stun cattle. The auction brought him more than expected, and I remember feeling proud in that dangerous way men feel proud right before they stop paying attention. Then $12,000 went missing from the settlement account. Ellis found it first. He came into my office holding the bank statement. Face pale. "We have a problem." I looked at the numbers and felt heat crawl up my neck. Bookkeeping error? No. He said it too quickly. Molly had made the deposit that week. She had been 19, restless, fighting with Jean, dating a musician I considered worthless mostly because he reminded me of myself before responsibility sanded me down. When I asked Molly about the deposit, she stared at me like she knew the question before I asked. I didn't take it. I didn't say you did. You didn't have to. Families repeat lines without knowing it. That one still echoes. That night, Molly packed a duffel bag. Ellis drove her to Oklahoma City. Jean watched from the porch and would not let me go after them. "You're choosing him over me?" I said. "No," she said. "I'm choosing mercy over noise." I did not understand. So I chose anger, because anger never asks a man to understand anything. After Ruth spoke at the funeral, I drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel. I told myself she was a grieving widow trying to polish Ellis's memory. People do that. Death makes saints out of difficult men. But Ruth had not sounded sentimental. She sounded relieved to be disloyal at last. The next morning, I called Molly. She lived in Norman, taught art at a community college, and had built a life with careful fences around it. We spoke on birthdays, sometimes Christmas. Our conversation stayed light enough to float. "Dad," she said, "I saw Ruth Mayhew." Silence. She said you didn't take the money. Another silence, longer. Finally, Molly said, "I wonder when somebody would tell you." I sat down hard in the kitchen chair. "You knew?" "Yes." "Who took it?" "I'm not doing this over the phone." "Molly." No, she said. And for the first time in years, I heard the 19-year-old girl under the grown woman. You don't get to use that voice and make me answer. That stopped me. She came 2 days later, alone, no husband, no children, just Molly in a green sweater, carrying a tiredness I recognized because I'd helped make it. We sat on opposite ends of my living room. Before we talk, she said, I need you to understand something. I was angry at you. I still am, some days, but I did not leave because I hated you. Then why? She looked at her hands. Because Nate was using again. The word again unsettled me. What do you mean, again? Molly lifted her eyes. He started with pain pills after his shoulder surgery. By the time the money disappeared, he was taking whatever he could get. I shook my head. No, Nate was working every day. Dad. No, you didn't want to see it. That landed because it was true in the plainest, cruelest way. I had thought my son was lazy, moody, ungrateful. I had not thought he was sick. Molly told me Nate stole the money. Not all at once. Not cleanly. He pulled cash from weekend deposits, wrote down false totals, covered one shortage with another, and kept promising himself he would fix it before anyone noticed. Ellis noticed. So did Jean. So did Molly. I was the last to know because I was the easiest man in the building to impress and the hardest one to disappoint. Nate could fool me with a strong back and a yes, sir. Molly could not fool me because I had already decided she was trouble. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked. Molly gave a small laugh with no humor. You remember the night you found beer in Nate's truck? I did. He was 15. You made him pour out in the driveway, then told him if he ever embarrassed you like that again, you put him on the street. I was trying to scare him. You did. I looked away. Molly continued. When Ellis confronted him about the money, Nate fell apart. He said he would pay it back. Then he said you would kill him. Not literally. He meant you would look at him like he was nothing. I wanted to defend myself. The defense would have been weak. Molly said Jean wanted to get Nate into treatment quietly. Ellis found a place outside Shawnee that would take him fast if they paid up front. Ruth helped. Molly drove him there. And the missing money? I asked. Ellis covered it temporarily from his own savings. Then why did everyone let me think you stole it? Molly's mouth tightened. Because I let you? That was the first twist in its full shape. My daughter had not been the thief. My son had been. And the people I accused had been trying to keep him alive long enough to become honest. The room seemed to tilt a little. Not dramatically. Just enough for every old certainty to slide out of place. Where's Nate now? I asked. Molly looked toward the window. Still here. Still sober. Still afraid of you. I had seen Nate twice in 18 years. Once at Jean's mother's funeral, where he shook my hand like a bank manager. Once at Molly's daughter's graduation, where we stood under a white tent and discussed the heat as if weather were our only shared history. He lived in Tulsa, worked as a counselor at a recovery center, married, divorced, remarried, a whole life unfolding 15 miles from mine while I stayed loyal to my version of events. Molly gave him my number. He did not call. I deserved that. So I drove to the recovery center and sat in the parking lot for almost an hour, watching people smoke by the side door. Finally, Nate came out carrying a stack of folders. He was 35 now, thicker through the shoulders, beard trimmed, hair going thin at the crown. My boy and not my boy. When he saw me, he stopped. Dad. Nate. He looked at the folders in his arms. I have a group in 10 minutes. I can wait. He almost said no. I saw it. Then he nodded toward a bench under a leafless tree. We sat with 2 feet of cold air between us. Molly told me. I said. He closed his eyes. Ruth. Ruth started it. He nodded. I'm sorry, he said. Those words were too small for what they carried. They were also more than I had given him. I should have known, I said. You knew I was a mess. I knew what was convenient to know. He looked at me then. That was the first honest moment we had shared since he was a boy. I stole from you, he said. You were sick. I was sick. I also stole. He said it like a man who had practiced not hiding behind either truth. I let your sister take the blame, I said. She wouldn't let me confess. That surprised me. Nate looked toward the smokers by the door. She said if I told you then, I would spend the rest of my life trying to prove I was not your worst day. I asked Nate to explain. He rubbed both hands over his face, and for a second he looked 17 again. The night Molly drove me to Shawnee, I wanted to turn around. I told her I needed to tell you. She pulled over at a gas station and said, "You can tell him when you have a self to give him." That sounded like Molly. Too young for the wisdom, too hurt to make it gentle. She took that from you, I said. She bought me time. And Ellis, Nate smiled a little, painfully. Ellis said every family needs one person willing to be misunderstood for a while. He thought a while meant months. 18 years is a long while. I met Jean the following Sunday. She still lived in the same house, though she had painted the front door blue. I had not been inside since I carried my last box out. She opened the door and studied me before deciding whether to step aside. "You look old," she said. "You always were honest." "Not always." We sat at the kitchen table where our family had eaten pot roast, argued over homework, and collapsed without knowing it. "Why didn't you tell me after Nate got sober?" I asked. Jean poured coffee. "Because sober is not cured. Because you had already decided Ellis betrayed you and Molly disappointed you. Because every time I thought about telling you, I heard that glass breaking. I never hit anyone." "No," she said, "but fear does not always need contact." I accepted that because denying it would have wasted what time we had left. Jean said Ellis wanted to confess many times. Molly refused. Nate begged once. Jean stopped him. "And you?" I asked. I was ashamed. "Of what?" "Of being relieved that you blamed someone else." That was the first moment I saw Jean clearly. Not as the wife who left. Not as the woman who chose the children against me. Just a tired mother who had made a terrible bargain and then lived inside it. Nobody came out clean. Maybe nobody ever does. The second twist came from Ruth. She called me a week after Molly's visit and asked me to come by the house. Ellis's house. I had avoided it for so long that the drive there felt like trespassing in my own past. Ruth met me on the porch with a cardigan pulled tight around her. "There is one more thing," she said. Inside, the house smelled like furniture polish and old coffee. Ellis's recliner sat by the window, angled toward the street. I did not look at it long. Ruth led me to the dining room. "Ellis did not only cover the missing money," she said. "You know that part now. What else did he do?" She folded her hands on the table. "He bought your debt." I stared at her. "What debt?" "The auction house was failing before Nate stole from it. You were behind on consignor payments, taxes, insurance. Ellis hid it from you because he thought your pride would make you take risks. My business was fine." "No, Warren, your voice was fine. The business was sick." I wanted to argue, but numbers have a way of outliving ego. Ruth said Ellis took out a loan against their house to keep the auction house open after I refused to cut expenses. When Nate stole the money, Ellis saw the truth. If I learned everything at once, I would not just lose my temper. I would lose the business, the house, maybe Nate. So he let me think he ruined me. He told Jean it was better for you to hate him than hate your son while the boy was still trying to live. I remembered Ellis standing in my office, pale, holding the bank statement. "We have a problem." He had been trying to say we. Not you, not me, we. The second twist was that Ellis had not only protected Nate from me, he had protected me from the full cost of my own pride, and I had repaid him by turning him into the villain of my life. I went to Ellis's grave the next morning. The cemetery sat beside a Tulane road south of town, flat and open under a pale Oklahoma sky. His stone was simple. Ellis Ray Mayhew. Husband, friend, father. The word friend nearly undid me. I stood there with my hat in my hands. "I was wrong," I said. The wind moved through the dry grass. "I wish that did you some good." Of course it did not. The dead do not need our apologies. We do. That is the part nobody tells you. Later that day, Molly, Nate, Jean, Ruth, and I sat together in Ruth's living room. It was awkward, tender, and uncomfortable enough to be real. Nate spoke first. I need to say what I did. Molly started to object, but he held up his hand. No, I'm not confessing, so you can punish me. I'm saying it because I spent years letting you carry a shape that belonged to me. He told the story plainly. The pills, the lying, the money, the shame, the treatment, the relapses nobody had told me about. The mornings he stayed sober out of love, and the nights he stayed sober out of spite. When he finished, I said, I am sorry I was not a father you'd come to. He looked down. I am sorry I did not come anyway. Molly wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. I am sorry I decided saving him meant losing you. Jean said nothing for a while. Then she looked at me. I am sorry I was more afraid of your anger than I trusted your love. That one hurt differently, because she had been right to be afraid, and maybe wrong not to trust me. Both can be true. Most painful things are. Ruth poured coffee nobody wanted. That helped more than it should have. We did not become a perfect family after that. People like to imagine truth fixes what silence broke. It does not. Truth is more like turning on lights in a damage room. You still have to decide what can be repaired, what must be thrown out, and what you are willing to live with. Molly let me visit more often, but she watched my tone around her children. I deserve that. Nate invited me to one of his recovery center dinners, where I sat beside men who reminded me of every version of my son I had refused to see. Jean and I learned how to speak without using old wounds as punctuation. Ruth came to Thanksgiving that year and told stories about Ellis that made us laugh until the laughter turned quiet. I sold the old auction house building the following spring. It had been empty for years, but I kept paying insurance because some part of me thought holding on proved something. Before the sale, Molly and Nate walked through it with me. The ring on the counter was still there, worn into the wood where bidders had leaned for decades. I could almost hear my own voice rolling through the room. Do I hear 50? 50 now 75? Nate stood where he used to stack chairs. I hated this place, he said. Molly looked around. I loved it. I said, I think I did both. That made them smile. At Ellis's next birthday, we gathered at his grave. Ruth brought a folding chair. Jean brought flowers. Molly's youngest left a pebble on the stone. Nate stood beside me, close enough that our sleeves touched. I wish he could see this, Nate said. I looked at the name carved in granite. I think he saw enough of us to hope for it. I did not believe every misunderstanding can be undone. Some arrive too late. Some people are gone before we become brave enough to ask the right question. But I know this now. A person can be wrong about an event, wrong about a friend, wrong about a daughter, wrong about a son, and still be given a small place to begin again. Not the old place, a humbler one. Sometimes that is the only place where love can finally sit down.